Good evening, everyone. My name is Heidi Arndt, and thank you so much for joining Associated Black Charities' first event focused on the COVID vaccine, Just the Facts. Like to really appreciate and send out appreciation to you and all of our partners for being able to join us this evening. I know that everybody is busy, but we wanted to make sure that we reached out to our community and provided information so that you're armed with the facts to be able to make decisions for yourself as you contemplate the vaccine. This event is being recorded, so if you'd like to have access to it, you will have access on our website going forward. Please place any questions that you have in our chat function. And after our panelists have completed their speaking parts, they will then take questions in the end. And we'll make sure to try to address as many questions as we can before the hour is up. We'd like to first thank all of our partners. Our first partner, of course, is the University of Maryland Medical System. I'd like to especially thank that partner. We will be partnering with that organization as we move forward with other things. Then we'd also like to thank the Greater Baltimore Urban League as well. We'd also like to thank Heritage United Church of Christ and the Morning Star Baptist Church for being partners with us on our event tonight. As I mentioned, this is the first event of this topic. We will be holding another event on March 11th, and we'll get that information out to you shortly. But that will be another event to ask any questions and have a follow-up on information as it evolves. And again, like to thank all of our panelists for being involved in our activity today. And, you know, Associated Black Charities works across Maryland as an educator, advocate, and supporter to eliminate race-based structural barriers and advance long-term solutions that create new opportunities for African Americans to thrive financially and build stronger economies for all. We are really pleased and excited to have Dr. Michelle Gourdine as our facilitator tonight. Dr. Gourdine is the interim chief medical officer and senior vice president at the University of Maryland Medical System for population health and primary care. As the chief medical officer, she works in collaboration with all of the chief medical officers across the 13 hospital system. And she's focused on advancing patient safety, quality, and the overall patient experience. So thank you, Dr. Gourdine, for hosting and facilitating our event tonight. And I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Great, Heidi, thank you so much. I'd like to thank you and Associated Black Charities, Diane Bell McCoy, your president and CEO, for hosting this important event. You know, it's really important for us to get information out to all of our communities about COVID and specifically about the COVID vaccine, which has been available since last December. We believe that this vaccine really does present our best hope for getting to the other side of this terrible pandemic. Just to put the importance of this evening in perspective, I'd like to share with you a few numbers. As of today, more than 27 million people in the United States have been diagnosed with the coronavirus. Here in Maryland, more than 367,000 people have been diagnosed. More than 7,400 people have died. And I would venture to guess that many of us on this panel and many of those of you who are participating have also known people who have either been diagnosed with COVID or have died from this disease. The good news about the vaccine is that so far in the state of Maryland, more than 745,000 individuals have been vaccinated, which is roughly about 9% of our population. We've got a ways to go, but we're excited to be able to provide this vaccination to individuals. Particularly in the African American community, it's very important for us to provide information about the coronavirus vaccine because of the impact that COVID has had in our communities. We understand that African Americans are 1.5 times more likely to be diagnosed with COVID, 4 times more likely to be hospitalized, 3 times more likely to die from COVID. And you might ask why? Why is that disproportionate impact there? Well, there are a number of reasons, including the fact that there are certain conditions like heart disease, certain types of lung disease, and diabetes and obesity, which happen to be more prevalent in the African American community for many reasons. But there's also this set of factors. African Americans are disproportionately likely to be exposed to COVID. We disproportionately represent individuals who are occupying what are called essential jobs. These are positions where individuals are not able to work from home and are more likely to be in the public and therefore be exposed. We also understand that certain of us live in households which are multi-generational, which makes it very difficult, if exposed, to isolate and prevent spread of the disease. We believe information is power, and so we want to provide information to our communities and specifically the African American community to make sure that you are equipped with what you need in order to make a decision and a choice about getting a vaccine. Now, I understand that you might be hesitant. Quite frankly, some of my family members were hesitant as well. And that hesitancy is grounded in our history that goes back many, many decades of harmful research conducted on African Americans, exposing us to unnecessary risks and not fully explaining the research, treating us as experiments. But things are very, very different today. As a physician, I can say confidently that the medical community has learned from those past experiments and has taken steps to ensure that all individuals are informed and are able to receive adequate information in order to consent to any type of medical treatment prior to being given that treatment. And that's why we're here today. And I am so pleased to announce this very illustrious panel who are absolutely informed and will be able to provide you with really vital information regarding not only coronavirus, but the coronavirus vaccine. I will introduce the panel. They will provide about 10 minutes each of an overview of different components of the presentation that we want to give to you tonight. And then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. I would ask that you please not ask any questions about your personal condition because our physicians will not be able to address those questions as they are more appropriately addressed by your primary care physician. And so with that, let me introduce our panel. The first panelist that you will meet is Dr. Geoffrey Varner. He will bring a unique voice to the panel from his vantage point as a best-selling author, physician, international speaker, and executive. His degrees and continued training span institutions, including Hampton, Harvard, and Johns Hopkins. Dr. Varner founded the healthcare industry consultant Lifeline Medical LLC. He is the author of Home Alive, 11 Must Steps to Surviving Encounters with the Police, and has served in numerous emergency medicine settings across the Maryland region. Thank you, Dr. Varner, for joining us. The next panelist you will hear from is Dr. Gregory Schrank. Dr. Schrank, I'm proud to say, is a colleague of mine who served as the incident commander of the University of Maryland Medical Center's COVID-19 response through the spring and summer of 2020, and is currently helping to plan COVID-19 vaccination efforts for patients across the University of Maryland Medical System's 13 hospitals. He is an assistant professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Disease at the University of Maryland School of Medicine, and he currently sees patients at the R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center, as well as serving as Associate Hospital Epidemiologist for the University of Maryland Medical Center. Dr. Schrank, thank you for joining us. And finally, my colleague, Dr. Fermin Barrueto, who is the Chief Medical Officer and Senior Vice President at the University of Maryland Upper Chesapeake Health System. He is also the Incident Commander for Upper Chesapeake for COVID-19, and he co-chairs the University of Maryland Medical System's Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee. Dr. Barrueto is double board certified in emergency medicine and medical toxicology. He has authored prolifically in the medical and education communities, and he has led several new population health initiatives, as well as serving as medical director for the Comprehensive Care Center. Dr. Barrueto, thank you for joining us this afternoon. And so with that introduction, I'm pleased to turn it over to the first of our panelists, Dr. Geoffrey Varner. Dr. Geoffrey, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gourdine. Thank you very much, ABC, and thank you very much to my colleagues. We're going to get started. We're going to move kind of fast here. I recognize this is about the vaccine, but we've got to right side a few things. While the vaccine is here, the models show that by April 1st, it will only save about 9,000 lives, whereas masking and social distancing will save about 100,000 lives if everyone does it. Again, the vaccine's here, but there's some things we've got to do right now. In other words, we have to be armed with the right information. For instance, there are 5 places that are accountable for 80% of the transmissions, 5 places. Those are restaurants, bars and cafes, places of worship, hotels, and gyms. I'm gonna say it again. Restaurants, bars and cafes, hotels, places of worship, and gyms, with the restaurants making up 40% of those. And then someone always asks, well, why is it that those places, they all have their different nuances, but let's just look at it this way. It takes about 1 to 1,000 particles, 1 to 1,000 particles for someone to contract COVID, meaning that if they're exposed to 1 to 1,000 particles, they may contract COVID. Now, let's leave that there. Let's go over here. Someone who has active COVID, every time they breathe, this is a wide range, they're breathing out anywhere from 10,000 to 10 million active particles every time they breathe. Let's go back over here. What did I say? How many particles does it take for someone to contract COVID? Between 1 to 1,000. What's my point? Wearing a mask and socially distancing is absolutely key and essential. The other part of this is, keep in mind, 6 feet is a minimum distance. 6 feet is a minimum distance. If I have active COVID and I'm talking, it goes 6 feet. If I sneeze, I'm sorry, if I cough, it goes up to 20 feet. If I sneeze, it goes up to 30 feet. Whereas if we have on a nice quality mask, most of that goes, it drops to the ground, or if it ejects through the mask, because it is a cheap mask, it does not eject as far. Having a mask is absolutely key. Now, let's switch gears. COVID's here. We've got the new strains, which I'm sure that many of that my esteemed colleagues are going to touch on. But what we do know about these new strains is that they are about 55% more contagious, about 55%. And now we're starting to realize that they are more lethal too. Latest study shows that they're about 30% more lethal. Why is that important? Because we have to be the biggest advocates for the health of our families, which means, as Dr. Fauci has said the other day, we may need to double mask. We may need to double mask because the vaccine's here. But keep in mind, only less than 10% of the US population has been vaccinated. So we've got to take it upon ourselves. One other point, I'll say this just up front. The literature's mixed, but now it's starting to show. If you are vitamin D deficient, vitamin D deficient, you are more likely to have a negative outcome. Some people are going to say the literature's not clear on that. Well, we have our first randomized study that just came out. People who are vitamin D deficient are at greater likelihood of having a negative outcome. Who's vitamin D deficient? It's darker skinned people and older people. That was not a political statement. It was a scientific statement. Follow me. All right, I'm moving kind of fast. So everybody just take a deep breath. Let's keep it rolling. So the darker you are, so most of our sunlight comes from, most of our vitamin D comes from exposure to the sunlight. 90% of it comes from exposure to the sunlight. The darker you are, the less efficient you are at converting the sunlight to vitamin D. And also the older you are of any color, because of the skin changes that we get as a result of getting older, the less efficient you are at converting sunlight to vitamin D. And who are the most vulnerable populations? It's those people of color and older people. You ask why? I'm sure that our esteemed virologists may get into this, but very globally, vitamin D plays a unique role within the immune system. It's the regulator. It's the referee. When it's absent, sometimes it causes an overreaction of the immune system. What does COVID do? It causes an overreaction of the immune system. But there are some experts on here who can talk more about that. I'm gonna switch to the vaccine real quick. Hey, there are only 2 available vaccines. Often I get calls about, hey, which one should I take? Here it is. Anyone that's offered to you. Full disclosure, I took the Pfizer. I had my second shot 4 weeks ago. Everyone in my family has, except for my 14-year-old son, has been vaccinated. But the most common question that I often get is, hey, the vaccine can't be safe because it was developed so fast. Well, let's just walk through that real quick. I got 4 minutes. Let's just walk through that real quick. Usually it takes anywhere between 54 to 72 months to develop a vaccine, 54 to 72 months. We did this one in about 11 months. Here's why. Very, very broadly, usually there's a preclinical stage that you go through. Then there's a clinical stage. Then there's a manufacturing stage. And then there's a distribution phase. You usually do it each step at a time. Preclinical, clinical, manufacturing, and distribution. Most of the time it's been the manufacturing and the distribution phase. But because of all the money that was put into this, all of it was being done at the same time. It was all being done at the same time, which carved out a whole lot of times. I get it. Someone's going to say, well, how do you rush through the clinical phases? They were not rushed through. It was not rushed through one bit. Usually a slowdown within the clinical trials are getting enough people enrolled, making sure that enough people are, for lack of a better word, infected. But because citizens across the world raised their hand, we had plenty of people enrolled right away. And not only that, unfortunately, but fortunately, there was enough COVID in the community that enough people were able to go out and they were able to contract COVID. No one was injected with COVID. Therefore, we were able to go through those clinical trials in record time. So hence, that's why we were able to develop this vaccine so quickly. And not one step was skipped. And usually once you do your studies, you send it over to the federal government. It takes them anywhere from 9 months to start to look at it, and then another 9 months to get back to you. This time, as we were doing those trials, the federal government or the federal officials were looking at our data as we were doing it. Hence, it shaved off a whole lot of times. And then my final comment is, while there is there's this myth that there's a vaccine hesitancy within the Black community, and the reason why I say a myth, the latest studies are showing that about 12% of Black Americans are vaccine hesitant, 12%. But Nationally, of all colors, 11 to 12% nationally are hesitant. So you have to ask yourself, and I'm not sure what it is, what is going on, because 67% of those people who are vaccinated are not Black. We're only 5.6% of those people who are vaccinated. What's my point? A, make sure that you make the vaccine, that you do all your part to make sure the vaccine is available to your community. And most importantly, make sure that you get vaccinated and that you make sure those around you are vaccinated, and that you reach out to 5 people and say, hey, I'm going to make sure that you get vaccinated as well. I'm at the end of my 10 minutes. I thank you very, very, very much. I know that we were moving, but thank you for keeping up with me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Geoffrey. Let's move on to Dr. Gregory Schrank. Dr. Schrank.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Gourdine, and that was actually a perfect segue, because I'll be touching upon the concept of herd immunity. So making sure that not just you're vaccinated, but others around you are as well. So I'll be focusing a little bit of time on the next 10 minutes, specifically on the vaccines themselves, what types of vaccines they are, how they work, a little bit of the science. We'll get into some of the details, just so that, as we mentioned at the outset, that you can feel like you're very well informed when you're making decisions for yourselves and hopefully choosing to get the vaccine. So vaccines are, I think, without a doubt, some of the most important medical therapies that have been developed by humankind, really in our history. Prior to vaccines, there were a number of different infectious diseases in particular that led to a significant amount of suffering and even death, and particularly amongst even children, young, healthy people. Things like polio, that for those that grew up in the 1940s or 50s likely recall some of the final epidemics of polio in the United States, which thanks to vaccines is essentially unheard of here in the US, and really just occurs in a couple of countries around the world, and even there are quite rare. Another famous disease that throughout human history caused an immense amount of suffering was smallpox, which of course was one of the first vaccines identified as being able to prevent infection, really not just a therapy to treat infection, but to prevent the disease altogether, really a novel concept at the time. And over decades, with a lot of work and a lot of effort and energy, we were able to completely eradicate smallpox from the earth, really saving into the future thousands and thousands, if not millions, of lives over time. Vaccines themselves are designed for a specific type of infection. So each germ that we're looking to help prevent an infection with, there is a vaccine that we design specifically for that germ. Some of them are bacteria, like the pneumonia vaccine that some of you may have received, or there's a meningitis vaccine that children receive in particular. But many of them are directed at viruses like influenza, or in this case, COVID-19. Vaccines themselves, some of them work in different ways, but in general, the concept is that we're training the body in order to feel like it can recognize and attack a germ when it first infects you. So in the case of COVID-19, what we're aiming to do is train the body to recognize COVID-19. So that way, as Dr. Varner described, if you were to come into contact with a particle containing the virus, your body would be able to quickly recognize it and take care of it, address it, neutralize it before it causes infection. Some of those, so the vaccine trains the body, and in turn, some specialized cells within the body develop proteins called antibodies, which you may have heard of. Those antibodies are what actually then recognize the germ and help trigger the immune system to attack it. Some antibodies last months, some antibodies last years. So for some vaccines, we receive them as children and immunity lasts our entire lives. Sometimes we need boosters, things like the tetanus booster that we get every 10 years. That's a good example. It's not known right now how often we'll need something like a booster for COVID-19, but that's where there's still ongoing active research. So the two current vaccines that are authorized by the Food and Drug Administration for COVID-19 both work in almost the exact same way. They're really almost identical in every way, both Pfizer and Moderna. They're what's called mRNA vaccines. I'll get into that in a moment. But mRNA is kind of a special type of instruction, a manual, if you will, that tells our body how to create different types of proteins. mRNA is not unique to the COVID-19 virus. It's actually something that's in our bodies all the time. We use mRNA within our own cells to help build the proteins, the structures that our body uses to function every day. So these viruses, these vaccines contain a small amount of mRNA or instructions that guide our cells to create what's called the spike protein on the virus. So those are if you've seen pictures of the coronavirus, the ones that we're all familiar with now, there's these little spikes that sit on the outside of the shell of the virus. It's those spike proteins that are really easily recognizable by our own body. And so scientists at the NIH and around the world, once we learned about this virus and understood what different targets we could use, thought that the spike protein was a great target. This is built upon decades of research ongoing, actually right down in Bethesda at the Vaccine Research Center, where work was ongoing already by vaccinologists to look at developing other coronavirus vaccines prior to the pandemic. So there was a great foundation of work already in existence. They took the spike protein's genetic material and created an mRNA or instruction manual for our body. And so that mRNA piece is contained in a small fat bubble. There really aren't too many ingredients in the vaccine at all. It's really the mRNA, the fat bubble, and then a couple of different types of chemicals that help keep the vaccine stable within when it's being frozen and then when it's in the syringe. When it enters into our body, when it's injected, that fat bubble enters into our cells. It opens up, the mRNA instruction manual is then read by our cells. That creates the spike protein, not any other part of the virus. It's not creating the virus. It's not entering into our own DNA at all. In fact, the body just creates the spike protein. And then what's actually really ingenious or really great about the mRNA vaccine is then it kind of just goes away. The body actually recognizes it and says, I don't need this instruction manual anymore. And it takes it apart. But what's left are the spike proteins that we created, and those leave our cells where our immune system says, I don't recognize this. This is something new, and actually then starts the process of making antibodies. So that way, if we were to be exposed to the coronavirus, to COVID-19 in the future, our body already has the tools it needs to be able to take care of the virus and prevent disease. So what's important to note is that when these vaccines, and I think Dr. Varner really spoke to this very well, is when they went through the process of being developed, none of the safety measures or oversight that is typically involved in a vaccine were skipped over. The way that we were able to develop these vaccines very quickly was by cutting through some of the bureaucratic steps that are involved in a vaccine development and also pouring a ton of resources and time into it very quickly around the world. So there were oversight committees and safety boards that were in place to make sure that when this vaccine was going through the clinical trials, no steps were skipped and no safety measures were bypassed. The clinical trials included tens of thousands of people. It was a point to actually include a diverse population. So about 10% of each of the phase 3 studies for both Pfizer and Moderna included patients that identified themselves as Black, about a quarter in each of them, a little bit more in one, a little bit less in the other, but about a quarter identified themselves as being Hispanic or Latino. And so, and then these were not just here in the United States, but across the world, these clinical trials. So 95% efficacy and 95% ability to prevent symptomatic disease was the finding in both of those clinical trials. So the endpoint, meaning the outcome that we were looking to study in the trials, was people that went on to develop symptoms of COVID. So this is the final point that I want to end on before I'm turning it over to Dr. Barrueto, is that what we do know is that if you receive both doses of the vaccine, about 10 to 14 days or so after that second dose, your body will have created high levels of antibody to protect you against the virus. And so we do know that from the clinical trials, it will prevent clinical symptomatic disease in about 95% of people. What we need to understand more of, and there's active research ongoing here, is how effectively it prevents transmission. So what we don't want is that is a number of people becoming asymptomatic carriers and walking around without masks and not knowing that they may be carrying the virus, and thinking that because they've been vaccinated, they're completely protected against being exposed. It's very, very likely that these vaccines, with how highly effective they are, prevent a lot of transmission. But putting an exact number on that and knowing how contagious a person may be if they were asymptomatic and carrying the virus, that's what we don't yet understand. So until we get to the point where we know more about that and have very clear data on that, right now we know that it's very protective against symptomatic disease, almost completely 100% protective against severe disease leading to hospitalization and death, which is really what all of this is about, is making sure that our loved ones are not winding up very ill and in the hospital. We need to keep going with those measures that Dr. Varner mentioned earlier, physically distancing and wearing a mask, until at least we reach what's called herd immunity, where a person that's infected, that's contagious, is unlikely to spread the virus to many people because everybody else around them has been vaccinated. And when we get to a certain threshold, which there's varying estimates of what that is, probably somewhere around 60–70% of the population, maybe a little bit more, until we get to that level where we that number of people have been vaccinated, we may see ongoing transmission. But when we reach that threshold, that's where transmission will likely stop, and that will bring the end to the pandemic. And
great. Thank you so much, Dr. Thank you. All right, our final panelist is Dr. Fermin Barrueto. Dr. Barrueto.
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm bringing up the final part of the batting order here, and I want to make sure that I know it's getting late in the evening. So I'm bringing a little bit of a lighter side, but also handling what happens when we actually administer the vaccine. And I'm actually, I'm not a social media expert, but I did a bunch of research over these past webinars that I've been doing to find out, what are the myths out there? And I'm going to take on the mythbuster role here for some of these vaccines. We know that Moderna and Pfizer are out there right now. Those are the two. And some of I've honestly been surprised by some of the myths out there. One is you can become infertile. I had to do some research on where this actually came from. And it actually has quite a well-detailed trail of a couple of authors putting out there what messenger RNA makes is proteins, and what proteins are made out of are amino acids. So just kind of like keys on a piano, the amino acids follow a particular sequence, and that spike protein, of course, has a particular sequence. They were able to match that amino acid with a placenta protein that exists in humans. And they made the connection, well, if you have COVID, if you receive the vaccine, that because of that match, it will also attack the placenta. Well, when we realize that there have been over 26 million people infected with COVID at this point, with absolutely no research whatsoever to substantiate infertility, miscarriages, or for that matter, problems with pregnancy, I think we can call that myth officially busted. So it is completely false. The one about changing your DNA physiologically impossible, again, busted. The microchip, I don't even know what to really say about that one, just completely false. So hopefully you can confirm these with reputable sites, make sure that you get your information from the experts, and it's really amazing how much these myths can get propagated. Let's go on to side effects. And this was another social media hotspot where they would show somebody who would actually get injected with a vaccine and pass out. There is actually a response. I have some very good friends, in fact, a couple surgeons who actually when they get an injection, because of their stress and anxiety related to it, they have what's called a vasovagal response. And it is a known physiologic response to any needle. The syringe could be completely empty and they could pass out. So that is not a typical side effect. And now we've administered the vaccine to over 17 million people in the United States. The adverse effect profile is really becoming, oops, that's what you get for trying to save energy. So when you get the vaccine, out of the 17 million people and within our own hospital, our experience, the majority of people have either mild to moderate effects. It can be fever, pain at the injection site, fatigue. Some people do feel like they got run over by the bus, but they're all self-limiting and usually go away within 48 hours. The one that got probably the most amount of media attention is one that we do take seriously. Any medication, as a toxicologist, anything can cause an allergic reaction. However, what we want to understand is, does it cause an allergic reaction at a higher rate than other medications? And the answer is no here. And then the most dangerous allergic reaction, of course, is anaphylaxis. And anaphylaxis is where you actually have to administer not just the usual Benadryl, but that's where you're actually in the hospital, your blood pressure is dropping, and you have to receive epinephrine or adrenaline. So that is a severe allergic reaction. And that has been happening at about a rate of 11 per 1 million, which is actually at or below a standard rate of anaphylaxis for any of our medications. So those are the facts as they stand on side effects. A couple other pieces, and I think they were already covered by our experts here. Dr. Schrank brought up the fact that a lot of the bureaucratic steps were cut out, and I can change that acronym to a lot of the BS was cut out. It was, but not the safety and not the clinical part of this. So it's important to understand the federal government stepped in and provided funding so that these drug companies could manufacture at risk. So as the studies were going on, they were trying to build up the stockpile to be able to meet the demand. And even with that, we still, as it's well detailed, unfortunately, in the media, we still have constraints. We're not going as fast as we want, and quite honestly, probably would never be as fast as we want. We're trying to put up these mass vaccination sites as well. There are continued links out there for people to try and register. And remember, registering is different than scheduling. So you register, you're getting on the list. And I know there's a lot of frustration and impatience out there, but hang in there. It's coming, and it's going to be an ongoing effort. Just saw a recent update, that President Biden's talking about 300 million doses out there for Americans before the end of the summer. I mean, that's really that's where we need to be. And to Dr. Schrank's point, this is how we kill the pandemic. How we survive the pandemic is the masking, social distancing, and the hand hygiene. But to kill the pandemic, we all need to do our part. Help people. Once you decide, I'm going to get the vaccine, be that champion. If you can, I consider my day fulfilled if I can convince just one person to go from hesitant to, I think I'm going to take the vaccine now. And that's the way we win against COVID. God knows all of us we were even reminiscing about wanting to get back to the usual gatherings, be it family, friends, coworkers. We all want to get there, and we get there together with this vaccine. Thank you. You're still muted, Michelle.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You guys were excellent. We just heard from 3 great presenters, 3 experts in the field that provided a wealth of information that I'm sure everyone found extremely helpful. And so at this time, we certainly are inviting those of you who are in the audience to submit your questions in the Q&A section below. And at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Heidi to help us with the Q&A portion of the program.
Thank you so much. And thank you, panelists. This was terrific information. So far we have received 3 questions. I'm going to start with question number 1. I'm a physician, and if you will speak to patient concerns about COVID arm, why is this happening during the second vaccine? Why is it worse during that vaccine versus the first vaccine? So maybe Dr. Schrank? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heidi. I can help to answer that question. So I think what the question's referring to with COVID arm, although this is the first time I've heard that term, is that some people, local pain at the site of the injection is extremely common. I can tell you that for my vaccine, it was definitely notable after the first and even more significant after the second. I could still use my arm, but I felt it definitely. There have been a small percentage of people that have developed worsening swelling and even sometimes a red rash around the site of the injection. A lot of people for the people that do develop that, most of the time it's right away, within hours to a day after the injection. Although there's a very small number of people that it's actually delayed, and it may start to develop a couple of days later and even last for a couple of weeks. This is a delayed reaction to the vaccine in a similar way that when people describe feeling crummy, like Dr. Barrueto spoke about, it's another similar type of response in the body's reaction to that mRNA and the spike protein. It is not a sign that you have a severe allergy to the vaccine. And for people that develop that after the first dose, it is not a sign that you need to avoid the vaccine for the second dose. It's actually not common enough to know whether or not people will have it again. We just don't have enough reports of that delayed onset. It was noted in the clinical trials, though, when that there were some people that had this delayed COVID arm, I guess, but they did not see with the second dose any signs of a severe allergy. In general, the second dose does lead to, both vaccines leads to more symptoms. And it's really because our body has already seen that, that spike protein once before. And when it sees it again, it triggers an even stronger immune response. What that's actually a sign of is that it's really working. It's working very, very well. And when we see 95% effectiveness of the vaccine, that's because your body took the time to develop lots and lots of antibodies after the vaccine. Unfortunately, it meant you felt kind of unwell for a day or so, but it pays off in its degree of protection.
All right, thank you very much. The next question. Seniors are asking, will they need a third vaccine due to the new variants?
So I can start with that one as well. The new variants, this is definitely an area of active research. What seems to be the case is that some of the mutations, in particular the variant that originated in South Africa as well as from Brazil, it does appear to reduce in testing done in laboratories in particular, the amount of activity that those antibodies can effectively have against the virus when we have either been naturally infected with COVID or have been vaccinated with COVID. They've taken blood samples from people that have had one or the other. The antibodies themselves reduce or have a reduction in their activity. Antibodies, though, are actually only one part of our immune system. I could probably spend hours and hours and hours talking about the immune system and not even touch upon nearly all of it. But there are other cells that help out in allowing our body to remember different vaccines or different viruses that they've been exposed to, and will also help out in prevention of severe disease. And so even though what we've seen is in clinical trials like from Johnson & Johnson, a reduction in how effective the vaccine is when looking specifically at people in South Africa, it's still been able to maintain a high degree of effectiveness at preventing severe disease and hospitalization, which is very, very important. And so I think what we will see down the road, because viruses like to evolve and mutate as they move through large amounts of people, is we may see a booster come down the road. We may even see something like the flu vaccine as it currently exists, where if you receive the flu vaccine, you're actually getting 4 flu vaccines directed at different strains of the virus. That I think is likely in our future as well for COVID.
Thank you. Dr. Gourdine, would you like to add to that?
I'm sorry, Heidi, I'm getting some feedback.
I was just asking if you or anyone else would like to add to Dr. Schrank's answer.
I would real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dr. I would just real quick. And because I think that the media has confused the public. For instance, the Pfizer and the Moderna, they're about 94, 95% effective, as Dr. Schrank said. But then when Johnson & Johnson came out, it said it was 72% effective. And so it made people think that one was better than the other. I think it's very important to first right side and say that usually a vaccine being efficacious, 75% is usually pretty good. But as it relates to the Johnson & Johnson, the reason why that one's still a very good one is because it included people who have the new variant. It included people who have the new variant. Let's go back to the Moderna one. We start off saying it was 94, 95% effective. But with the new variant, if you see that Moderna has said it's only about 60% effective. What's my point? Don't try to pass up one vaccine for another. Most of them, and no one here can really say definitively, most of them are probably going to lead towards, as Dr. Schrank said, needing another shot or another dose at some point anyways.
Yeah, if I can chime in real quick, and I see it, actually my name in the chat as well about the microchip, but a perspective from Dr. Schrank, the flu vaccine, from my rememberings, on a good year is 50, 55%, and on an average year, 45. And I think it's had some rough years as low as 30% effective. And we still believe and see the research and the numbers being controlled and attenuated with flu vaccination programs. Maybe you can comment quickly on that one, and then I'll touch base on the microchip.
Yeah, I don't think I would be exaggerating by saying that 95% is astounding. It's actually nothing short of a near miracle. It is one of the most highly effective vaccines that's ever been developed, and in the context of a pandemic and the amount of time it was developed is just really, really incredible. So when we set the bar extremely high when we came out the gate at 95%, and we are seeing the emergence of these variants, which is all the more reason why vaccination is so important right now, because mutations occur when more people are infected. The virus actually kind of takes advantage of all the replication it's doing in people to make some shifts and do some mutations. If we stop transmission, whether it's through masking and physical distancing, and then now the vaccine, we can prevent further mutations as well. So all of that, it's really all one combined effort to stop the spread of the pandemic.
And if I could just touch on the microchip piece, the ingredients have to be all both studied, looked at, listed to be submitted for emergency use authorization. And the FDA really is considered a worldwide gold standard. Some countries even use the FDA and their rulings as a surrogate for their adoption of medications. So these vaccines have four components: fat, messenger RNA, buffer, and the excipient or the liquid around it that carries it. So that's it. And there is no surreptitious additions of microchip. My wife might want to have a microchip to figure out where I am late at night at sometimes, but for the most part, there is no hidden agenda here. There is no microchip contained within these vaccines. Unfortunate social media buzz that really makes for a great movie, but does not make a good vaccine.
Let me just chime in with that, because you're right. That question comes up a lot. So I looked into it. So look at it this way. The federal government did not need to wait until a COVID vaccine to microchip you if they wanted to. They could have done the food, medication, or the flu vaccine. But I figured out where this came from. So it started with this thing called nanobites, but really it's nanoparticles. In order to get the messenger RNA in you, they've got to use something called nanoparticles, which are extremely small particles. It is basically a piece of fat. And someone turned nanoparticles into nanobites. So no one's microchipping you, but they are using nanoparticles, which is a technology that has been around since 1954.
All right, thank you so much. We have a question about if someone has had COVID-19, is it necessary to get the vaccine? And if so, which one should they get?
The answer to which one you should get is always the one that's offered to you. That is always the answer. And there is actually some good data from the CDC that suggests that after having COVID, and it's been replicated in a number of different places around the world, that you are protected with your own natural infection for at least 3 months. So right now, the duration is about 90 days in which they say you could defer the vaccine. There's some even better data now that suggests that might be out to 6 months, though the asterisk, the caveat to all of that are the variants. And so because we have seen in some laboratory-based studies, so not in real humans, but in the laboratory, that antibodies from infection with the original strain may be a bit reduced against some of the novel strains. I would encourage people that if the vaccine is offered to you, to take it. And that, whether it be a family member of yours that's been infected, same thing, a friend of yours that's been infected previously, same thing. Right now, we're prioritizing the people that we know are most vulnerable, whether they're at high risk for exposure or for complications. And so the opportunity to get the vaccine should not be passed up, because reinfection really could be devastating.
Thank you. As a grandparent, I am thrilled that younger children, for the most part, have not fallen victim to COVID. Why is that?
Well, by and large, no one technically knows, but part of the thinking is your immune system is really immature, and so the COVID has less of a target. But let's correct something. Children do get COVID, and they do transmit COVID. It's just that they tend to not have worse symptoms. They tend not to have negative outcomes. But children do get COVID, and they do contract COVID. And while I have the mic, I just want to touch on a question that I know someone in the audience is listening. I mentioned it earlier about this vaccine hesitancy. And as it relates to Black Americans, many people don't want to take it because they always talk about the Tuskegee experiment. Well, that's what we can touch, and that's what we know. But here's what it really is. And I'm a part of it. It's how the medical establishment currently treats Black folks now. It's been numerous studies that show that we get treated differently. There's a great study that even talks about pain and pain management, that just based upon color, even once you adjust for insurance, we get treated differently, and we apologize for that. So we're not dismissing your concerns, because they're practical and they're real. However, we have never been ever in a space where a virus could kill so many of us so fast. So I'm extending my arm and say that we are sorry, and I'm a part of that establishment. But at this point, we need you to trust us. Why? Because this coronavirus is killing over 4,000 people each day. It's killing over 4,000 people each day. So I would highly encourage you, give us just one more chance, at least during this period of time, and take the vaccine. And by the way, I don't know one doctor and I don't know one Black doctor who is choosing not to take the vaccine. And many of us have the same questions, but we also are fully aware of the devastation that it's causing.
Thank you so much. We're going to try to grab one more question, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gourdine. Is there any group of people for whom the vaccine is not recommended? Maybe persons with family history of an immune deficiency?
Sure, I'll start, and then Dr. Barrueto, feel free to jump in, or Dr. Varner. So the only, what we call contraindications, the only people that shouldn't receive the vaccine are people that have a history of a severe allergy to one of the few ingredients, or that have a history of allergy from the first dose that they received. But other than that, everybody else is eligible to receive it. There are groups that have been studied more that were included in the clinical trials and that are receiving the vaccine now. And there are some underlying conditions that we just don't understand as much about the vaccine, and like things like people that have received transplants, that are having getting chemotherapy for cancer, other things like that. But the concern isn't that the vaccine could potentially be harmful in those individuals. The concern is really just that because of the medications they take for their transplant or their chemotherapy, their immune system may not respond as well. But because they are so vulnerable to complications from COVID, we really, really encourage those individuals to get the vaccine as well. Others, please feel free to add in.
Yeah, I think my only other point is I think Pfizer were able to give up to age 16. Moderna, I think, is age 18. Of course, the age groups, you know, the young folk in below 16 or 18 are, of course, the least likely to have severe or serious COVID infection or hospitalization. So very thankful for that. And but that is the only other, you know, group that is not able to receive the vaccine right now.
And by the way, pregnant women, they're advised to consult their primary care doctor or consult their OB/GYN. And if they agree, then you can get the vaccine. And yes, while the studies, neither Pfizer or Moderna purposely included pregnant women. In each study, by the time the study ended, it had multiple pregnant women who all have done just fine.
And just to add into that, my wife, who is also in healthcare, happens to be a mom who's currently breastfeeding, and she received both doses of the Moderna vaccine all throughout that. So also, just for with my family, I really encouraged her to receive it. That's another area where we just don't have as much data, just like women who are currently pregnant, but there's no reason to believe, based on our science and understanding of the vaccine, that it would be harmful in any way at all.
Yeah, thank you for that addition. That's very important. And I did say that was our last question, but I'd like to ask one more question if we could. Are there any plans to close the racial disparity gap that exists in Maryland? And if so, what are the strategies as it relates to the vaccine?
Well, I do sit on the Prince George's County, two of the COVID commissions, and there is a plan. I have to admit, Maryland, the state, similar to many other states, we've had a few hiccups with the rollouts. But what we're uniquely focused on is making sure that the the zip codes, which many zip codes have been overlooked for some reason. So at least within Prince George's County, we're making sure that those zip codes are not overlooked. Because again, people, black people, let's not be confused here. And that is, the vaccine is available, but yet only 5.6% of black folks have taken it. And I get it. It's not our fault, but we've got to do what we can. Call your councilman, your county exec, and make sure it's available in your area. And don't fall prey to it's because we're vaccine hesitant. as I said earlier, 12%, 11 to 12% of Black folks are, but 11 to 12% of the entire population. There's no reason why we should be at 5.6%. And just on a final note, I would highly encourage you that while you've got some concerns about this vaccine, COVID can kill you within 14 days. Whatever your concerns about this vaccine, all of us who are taking it, we are going to be in the same boat. And so we will have a whole lot of time to figure it out in case there is something that matter. But so far, there's zero evidence to say that there's anything the matter with this vaccine.
Thank you so much. And again, we'd like to thank our panelists for taking the
At least I know it's not me.
I think Heidi might be frozen. So let me just, on behalf of Heidi and Associated Black Charities, thank all of our panelists for a really robust and informative discussion. I wanted to end by providing a couple of resources that you might want to seek out if you have access to the internet that will provide you with additional information and questions you might have that we might not have had time to answer today relative to COVID and the vaccine. The first is from the University of Maryland Medical System, umms.org/vaccine. That's umms.org/vaccine. The second is the Maryland State website, coronavirus.maryland.gov. And then finally, the CDC website, cdc.gov/coronavirus. So again, thank you everyone for participating this afternoon. Thank you to the audience and thank you to Associated Black Charities.